Hey guys, welcome to this presentation on viruses. I'm going to be talking about a lot of interesting stuff. Please make sure you're paying close attention because I will be moving kind of quickly here. So here are the state objectives that the state would really like you to understand. You need to be able to describe how disease is a result of a malfunctioning system, organ, and cell, and relate this to the possible treatment interventions. For example, diabetes, cystic fibrosis, and lactose intolerance. You also need to recognize that certain pathogens can seriously impair normal cell functions and the health of the organism, and in this case, the pathogen is the virus. You need to identify emerging biotechnology that shows promise in preventing and treating disease. People have known of disease for as long as humans have existed. They used to use the word virus to describe any disease, because the Latin word virus means slimy fluid. And as you know, I'm sure when you get sick, you have a lot of slimy fluid. In ancient times, they used to think that viruses, or specifically diseases, were the punishment of the gods. Maybe from the stars and the moons, maybe from witches' spells, maybe from deities, but they didn't really have any idea what caused disease. I'd like you to check out this website. It shows a list of viruses. You don't have to memorize any of them or anything like that. Just check it out because it shows that there are massive, massive, massive numbers of viruses. Viruses can be as common as a cold, or they can be as deadly as AIDS. And if you don't know what any of those are, I strongly encourage you to Google them real quick and see what some of the signs and symptoms are, because some of them are very common and humans are very at risk for some of these. How the discovery of viruses came to be, the discovery that viruses existed, started when some people studied what caused tobacco plants to become diseased. Tobacco used to be, and still is, a huge commercial industry. It makes a lot of money. So when tobacco plants started becoming diseased, people wanted to understand this and see if they could fix it. So they used filters, because at this point they kind of already knew about small organisms like bacteria. They used filters that would get rid of bacteria, but they still thought it was a bacteria until this guy, Martinus van Beijerinch, said it was a living contagious fluid. So they basically determined that it wasn't a teeny tiny cell. And in 1898, they determined that it was this living contagious fluid. They didn't really know what else to call it. The only problem is, by saying that it was living, they could seal it and store it, and when they opened it up years later, it was still infectious. So that was a huge sign that it was actually not living, because most living things cannot be sealed and stored and come back to life years later. But they kind of just let it go at this point because they didn't really know what else to do. But in 1899, Loeffler and Frosch found evidence about a disease called foot and mouth disease in livestock, and they said that it was caused by an infectious particle, even smaller than a bacteria. So at this point, they're no longer saying, hey, it's a living thing, but they are saying that it's something that exists and it is infectious. So it's infectious means spread from thing to thing, either animal to animal or animal to human, and I'll talk about how it can be spread in a few minutes. Finally, they determined that it was not actually a liquid, but a tiny particle. And you can see some of the symptoms of foot and mouth disease. Okay, they cause very, very bad sores on the feet and in the mouths, and these are very, very painful. It ended up killing massive numbers of cattle and sheep and horses. But the first official virus ever studied was yellow fever. Why this one? Well, during the Spanish-American War that took place in Cuba, 13 times as many soldiers died of yellow fever as died from wounds. So because it was killing so many people, so many soldiers, people were much more interested about it. They discovered that it was transmitted by mosquitoes. Okay, mosquito would bite someone that it was infected, and then it would go bite someone that was not infected and basically spread the disease. They eradicated the little buggers, and I call them little buggers because they eradicated the mosquitoes and therefore the yellow fever in the area, which allowed the completion of the Panama Canal after work had already been suspended due to high numbers of deaths of the workers from yellow fever. In 1887 to about 1897, there was a virus going around called cattle plague, otherwise known as rinderpest. Basically, what happened was livestock that was imported from Asia to Africa started spreading rinderpest. And it spread through Africa, killing about 80 to 90% of the cattle. And why was this such a horrible, horrible thing? Well, many, many, many people died from starvation because they didn't have the cattle. It also killed a lot of the wild animals in southern Africa. So someone actually came up with a sort of vaccine for this. Basically, what they did was they took the blood of a diseased cattle and they mixed it with the blood of a cattle that had survived the virus, and then injected this mixture into all the cattle, and then they became vaccinated basically against the virus, so they survived. However, this is not really considered the first vaccine or inoculation. In 1885, so before the use of the vaccine for rinderpest, they used the dried spinal cord of dead infected rabbits, and they kind of ground it up, and they inoculated against rabies. And the first vaccine, which wasn't actually a vaccine, it was actually called an inoculation, was done by Edward Jenner, and he used cowpox to vaccinate against smallpox in 1796. So basically what he noticed was that milkmaids, and you can see in this picture, milkmaid is someone who milks the cows, they used to get tiny little sores on their hands, and this was called cowpox. And then when they were exposed to smallpox, they wouldn't get sick, or they would get slightly sick, but then heal from it, whereas a lot of people were dying from smallpox. So basically what he did was he infected his own son with cowpox, and then infected his own son with a weakened form of smallpox. And although he got a little sick, the son got a little sick, he didn't die, so it saved his life. And here's a picture of someone with smallpox. If you ask your parents or your grandparents, they may have been inoculated against smallpox. In the 60s and 70s, the Department of Health went around inoculating a bunch of people because they wanted to eradicate smallpox, which they successfully did in 1979. And a lot of your parents or grandparents might actually have scars from that inoculation. This is a really great video. It's about 50 minutes long. I recommend that you watch it. It's pretty interesting, some of the stuff that they talk about. You don't have to, but I do recommend it so that you understand viruses a little bit better.